Chapter 9.
Zelda, wake up! I'm here to save you.
Her eyes, caked in crusts from the fitful doze on the dungeon floor, pried open to discover Link's face staring back at her, so close his sandy blonde hair tickled her nose. Those curiously thick, disarming lashes hooting dead, glassy eyes. Without hesitation he leaned forward, his slightly chapped lips angling to meet her own. She swung the shackles with all her weight, slamming them into his jaw.
Yiga bastard!
She cried as the apparition cackled, recoiling back in a burst of red smoke.
Oh good, you haven't lost it down here.
The masked soldier tittered.
I'm sure the king would be super disappointed to have you break that quickly. Quit screwing around, you moron!
His Gerudo partner scolded from the doorway.
What's the point of winning if you don't get to enjoy it?
The Yiga shot back as he popped the restraints from Zelda's wrists, scooping her up by the underarms and grappling her to his chest.
You forget your place.
The warrior scoffed.
Now hurry up before I tell His Highness that you've decided you're worthy of torturing his queen.
With a huff, the Yiga soldier seized Zelda by the elbow, pulling her back along to the dinghy. She squinted as the small boat drifted into the moat, the high afternoon sun blinding and turning the placid water's fractals into a glistening diamond trove. Spring was in its glory, creating a vivid spectrum of wildflowers flourishing along Olnol's cliffside. Normally the vista would be swarming with visitors from all over Hyrule, crowding in their carts and horses to enjoy their first picnic of the season and trying to capture the best picture of the vista, framing the castle and the blossoms perfectly so. The last time she'd seen the hills this empty, it was in Rauru and Sonya's sparsely populated little world. It was as eerie then as it was now, an absence contradicting a reality she always seemed to take for granted. They reached the docks on the east side of the castle, coming up the rough stairs carved into the cliff foundation to the back entry to the royal library. Already 2 of the king's guards were stationed at the lovingly carved back doors, etched with the same sacred crests as her ancient dress's tabard. Here in the light she could see clearly how filthy the delicate white fabric had already become, between the splatters of King Sidon's demise and the mold creeping through the lockup's floor. Golden embroidery threads split in ruin as their designs unraveled. Her Yiga companion plowed through the doors, revealing her favorite space in the entire palace. It appeared almost exactly as it had the last time she'd left it, save for the empty glass displays now gaping, useless along the first-floor bookshelves. The jewels had been pillaged, the regalia reclaimed away from view that way. At the far end of the sprawling 2-story atrium, a red knot of hair hovered over the miniature scale model of Hyrule. As her guard prodded her closer forward, she could see that all the markers schoolchildren had left behind, commemorating their visits by pinpointing their homes, had all been removed. She made a point on any visit to come in and peek at this little population density study disguised as an exhibit, feeling a thrill as she watched the pegs swell up from the places like dueling peaks, and deep Akala so devastated by the calamity, and the random hideaways up in the Heber Mountains or Gerudo Highlands marking their convergence in this collective space. In their place, black and red figures swarmed at the castle and the 4 domains, as well as the towns to the east. As she watched, the king revealed a single green peg from between his fingers, placing it on the edge of Hateno village. The crown was absent from his head, and his appearance was rather how she'd remembered him the small number of times they'd met before, his one-armed dark robe leaving his right side unencumbered, the gold-hilted sword side more an extension of his form than independent entity. A gauzy linen sash bound his torso, lending a flash of lush red, turquoise, and gold desert tapestry at his hip. With only the slightest shift in his stance, the continents of muscle forming his bare arm and chest tightened and bulged, a visceral, constant testament to his relentless strength. A swell of embarrassment surged within her as she stood in tatters, her skin and fingernails beset with grime. Her guard unnecessarily cleared his throat, prying Ganondorf's eyes from the kingdom to his audience.
What is this?
He snarled, his narrowed gaze boring into the Yiga's masked face.
It's the Queen, Your Majesty.
He stammered, nudging Zelda closer like a shield.
You sent for her?
He stepped from the table, closing the distance between them in 2 methodical steps.
And she's been in your care this entire night? Yes, Your Majesty. Me and Lana's watch,
he said, gesturing toward the black-robed Gerudo hanging back by the bookcases, glaring scimitars into her partner.
And you see fit to treat your queen like a common prisoner, leaving her to fester in the refuse of this dungeon? Not even affording her the decency of fresh clothes?
He leaned into the cowering underling, baring his teeth, the fringe of his beard scratching up against his mask.
When you disrespect her, you mock me,
he spat out.
There will be no second warnings against your insolence. You're relieved of this post.
The Yiga shrunk back with nothing but an acknowledging bow.
Lana,
Ganondorf summoned, the woman quickly stepping forward.
Take the queen upstairs and make sure she's back to feeling her best. We have an important audience this afternoon.
He turned to Zelda, a half-smile of apology crinkling his mirthful eyes.
Apologies, my darling. Everyone is still learning their place.
He pressed a kiss onto her forehead, squeezing her shoulder tightly before dismissing them with a vague wave of his hand.
This way, Your Highness,
Lana invited, gesturing toward the west doors, the ones leading to a wing of the castle she'd rarely visited. The tight, winding stairs spiraled 2 flights up to the main castle chamber, the room her mother and father had shared, much larger and grander than the cozy princess suite she left behind when Link suggested the Hatno house. She had vague recollections of finding Mother preparing for holidays within the room, surrounded by maids plaiting her hair and weaving flowers. She seemed so grown up to the child version of herself sitting on the fuzzy bear fur beside the fireplace, watching the women spin their special occasion magic. Now she realized that she was now the same age the queen was then, scarcely before her death. The simple fact sent her heart clattering into her stomach, a longing she had been too distracted to feel quaking the full force of grief through her again, so close to this tender place where she lived and then, suddenly, died. Lana nodded to her counterparts at the entrance, prompting them to open the door. Zelda stepped inside, unfollowed. Everything appeared almost as it did in her distant memory, the bear rug still frozen in his last roar. Even the dressing table was still set with the silver brushes and pins used to rein in her mother's hair. A formidable 4-post bed marked the center of the chamber, the thick velvet curtains tied back to reveal the sumptuous Rito-embroidered coverlet. On the nightside table, the only sign of any shifted presence, the dragon's helm crown, twinkling with the natural light pouring through the arched glass windows. From the far side of the room, a girl lugging a large basket of towels and Safina fronds emerged through the bathroom door. Her wavy strawberry hair bounced as she tucked through the door, crossing the threshold with a dancer's grace. The second she saw Zelda, her face exploded with awe, a squeaky yelp popping out as she hugged the basket to her chest.
Princess Zelda, Your Highness. I mean, the Queen? Oh no.
She blushed, bowing much deeper than what would ever be expected in such an informal setting.
I'm sorry. I hope I didn't insult you. No, not at all,
she said, utterly relieved to see another Hylian who wasn't corralled or trapped or in peril, even if she was gawking at her with unnerving excitement.
I am so sorry. I didn't know when you were going to arrive. I'm Ellie, your new attendant.
The castle hadn't staffed attendants since before the calamity, and she'd never seen this remarkably young woman before. She couldn't be more than 16.
How long have you been here?
She asked.
Only since this morning,
she said.
Barely a day and they're already staffed.
Zelda wondered aloud. A dark cloud rolled across the girl's expression, hinting at some hidden brutality predicating her swift arrival.
The soldiers were really convincing,
she said simply, banishing the recent memory with a shake of her head.
Would you like to start your bath?
From behind Ellie she could see steam rising from fresh hot water, fogging the intricate mirrors and glass lining the royal bathroom. The tub was set into the floor, rising just above in a solid marble basin. A skin of bubbles skimmed the surface, their floral perfume wafting in the fog. The mere sight of it felt like a balm on her frenzied, heightened nerves, and she waited with excruciating longing as the girl took her time to untangle the matted knots in her hair. Stepping out of the ruined dress, feeling the pads of her feet against the smooth, polished tile, flooded her with a sense of presence within her skin. Cloaked by the steam and the warm seclusion of the bath, she felt almost safe.
"Do you need anything, Your Highness?"
the girl called from behind the door.
"No, thank you, Ellie."
She excused her through the wall. Perching at the lip of the tub, she let herself seat, her back sliding down the slick marble. Her face slipped beneath the isle of bubbles, suspended in the heavy warmth until her lungs threatened to burst. Leaning her head against the edge, she fanned her arms through the water, its gentle resistance lulling her into a meditative pattern. The bundles of fresh Safina Ellie had tucked into the mounds of towels deepened her breath. Inviting a tentative peace, she knew she could not contemplate long, for fear of shattering it. Absent-mindedly, her right hand waved against her floating inner thigh. She let her touch linger there, where plump softness sheltered the taut muscle she'd carved through that blissful chosen life of mounting horses and scouring fields. Her fingers effortlessly slid from the feminine suppleness to brush against her entrance, and the lovely beat of pleasure at its gates. As her fingers lightly teased with her instinctual rhythm, her mind drifted to the small study just behind the Royal Library's miniature Hyrule. Back in the early days of peace, when they were still living in the castle as the restoration work raged, craftsmen and construction crews were present all hours of the day and night, racing to make the ruined stronghold a cultural pillar once more. Link and Zelda had been traveling from Faerun and the tropical Zone ruins, where she was leading a school field trip on the wonders of archaeology. The activities had gone long, stalled out by a cloudburst storm that drenched and scattered everyone, resulting in an extra hour spent trying to locate a student who'd found the best place to take shelter. Heading to the castle on their horses, simmering in their own flavors of annoyed, they'd gotten into it about the best route back.
"Let's just cut through Hyrule Field,"
Link pleaded.
"It's a straight shot. People will see us if we go through the field,"
she argued, insisting on following the Hylia River's banks.
"Who cares? How are they going to tell it's you, let alone what you look like, while you're speeding by on a galloping horse? And if we end up having to stop, I can't be Princess Zelda to anyone right now, all right?"
She could feel the fibers of his filter snapping as a retort sparked at the end of his tongue, but she dug her heels into the stallion and took off east to the river, leaving him the only choice he ever had, to follow. By the time they got back that afternoon, her carefully selected adventurer's costume of khaki-colored cotton and leather boots was drenched in the soupy tropics and her own sweat. As soon as the horses were safe in the gatehouse, she made a beeline for the library, the quickest space to reach without having to slink through the sanctum. She dumped her pile of reference books onto the reading table, hurrying Link on to follow.
"I need to hide,"
she hissed, leaning her shoulder into the trick bookshelf at the head of the room. Through the narrow slat of a passage they slipped, concealed in the king's secret study. The cool, musty air sent a thrill of relief as she kicked off the mud-caked boots and unrolled the long stockings beneath her skirt. She tossed the damp pith helmet onto the floor, shaking her hair free as she leaned back on the desk, stretching her sticky frame out in blessed respite. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the ecstasy of comfort. Suddenly she felt the buttery leather of Link's gauntlets gripping the flesh of her hips, his lips wicking the perspiration beating at her collarbone. The exasperated knot growing in his throat for all those miles snagged them together off-kilter, her skirt bunching and arms flailing for balance as his deceptively strong body slamming against her precarious perch, nips disguised as kisses tracing the straight shot between her breasts to her waistband.
"Link,"
she gasped, teetering against the desk.
"I thought you said not here."
They'd spent the last year making love as nomads in caves and tents and beach huts, anywhere but the crowded castle grounds, where Link was still a royal guard and astutely conscious of protocol. He wouldn't walk within 3 paces of her, let alone reach within her. She couldn't make out his face in the torch-cast shadows and splay of his hair, but there was a flash of recklessness she'd rarely glimpsed in her night, pulsing in his touch and the plunging octave of his voice as he whispered,
"You can't make a sound."
A dare, one she tested, making a high-pitched cry as he tore at the buttons on her once crisp shirt. His hand flew up, squeezing her cheeks.
Shh! I said quiet,
he commanded, retrieving one discarded stocking from the floor, balling it up with his fingers before sliding the muffler between her lips. In the bath she stroked herself faster, falling out of rhythm into a frenzied pace as the memory of Link's tongue uncovering her every pulsating crevice. Her hands deep in his hair begging him forward, further, forever. Her rapturous whimpers filled her head, trapped and ricocheting behind the gag. His hands stroked the inroads of her thighs beneath her hiked skirt, resting behind her knees to tilt her up ever closer, until his own body couldn't resist her any longer, and he stood to fumble himself free to enter her. And there in her mind he rose, the king with his red hair unspooling like fire, his long tongue running up and down the length of her calf, pressing himself against her just enough to test her eagerness. She squeezed her eyes tightly and she shook her head, trying to knock out the image as she heard the very real sound of the bathroom doorknob clicking open. End of chapter.